There may be no more famous offense of any sport than the triangle offense. Even the most casual of basketball fans have at least heard of the triangle. Maybe they don't know what it means or how it's ran, but most fans know of Phil Jackson and his 11 rings, widely attributed to the triangle. And while its use in the NBA is near obsolete today, the triangle still remains as one of the most iconic and important offenses in NBA history. So what is the triangle offense? Today we are going to break down the birth, the prime, and the death of the triangle, as well as the descendants that remain in basketball to this very day. While Phil Jackson is the one who is known for creating the triangle, the offense has been around decades before he was even in college. The one credited with the creation of the triangle is a former USC head coach in Sam Barry. Barry, who coached the Trojans basketball team from 1929 until 1950, was an early revolutionary of the sport, but his mark on history is most notable for creating the triangle. It would be further expanded on by one of his former players in Tex Winter. Winter was a collegiate coach for nearly 30 years who in his tenure has 8 Elite 8 performances and 4 Final Four appearances. After contemplating retirement following his college career, Bulls general manager Jerry Krause hired Winter to become an assistant coach, moving him and the idea of the triangle into the NBA. Phil Jackson was hired as an assistant 2 years later and then promoted to the head coach in 1989. With Jackson at the helm, he and Winter officially imposed the triangle offense, mostly as a method to counter the Jordan rules imposed by the Detroit Pistons. The Jordan rules was a defensive philosophy imposed by Detroit as an attempt to slow down the young star. By featuring an offense that relied on passing, off-ball cutting, and spacing, the hope was to punish the Pistons or any team that would try and double or get overly physical with Michael Jordan. Jackson saw a lot of success in his first year as a head coach. The Bulls went 55-27, making it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals until they lost to the Pistons in 7 games. But Chicago would have their revenge just a year later, as they once again met in the conference finals, but this time Chicago swept the now aging Pistons roster. Chicago would then dismantle the remnants of the dominant 80s Lakers squad, beginning the 1990s Bulls dynasty. After strained relations with Jerry Krause, Phil Jackson left the Bulls and took a year away from basketball, but he decided to come back, this time with a new duo in Los Angeles with Shaq and Kobe. The Lakers have already seen a ton of success with this duo, as they had made the playoffs in the previous 5 seasons, including the year before where they had made it to the semifinals before getting swept by the Spurs. Jackson took over for Del Harris and was the one who was able to get the Lakers over the hump. In his first year as the Lakers head coach, they won 67 games and then the NBA Finals. In all, they three-peated with their second of 3 championships, possibly being the most iconic, as they only had 1 total playoff loss. And while the dynasty couldn't continue on anymore after the loss of Shaq, the triangle remained prevalent in an ever-evolving NBA. After retooling for a few seasons, the Lakers came back, winning the 2009 and 2010 NBA championships. And for Jackson's entire tenure in LA, not counting the year that he wasn't coaching, the Lakers only failed to have a top 10 offense once, and that one time was in Jackson's last championship. I also want to mention Tex Winter, who was an assistant for all of the Bulls championships, as well as the Lakers three-peat, winning 9 NBA Finals and assistant coach, as well as serving as a consultant to the 2009 championship Lakers. In 2014, Jackson joined the New York Knicks as an executive and brought in a former player in Derek Fisher to coach the triangle. But Jackson was unable to replicate the success that was seen in previous dynasties. With a combination of poor coaching, questionable executive moves, and a public feud with Carmelo Anthony, the triangle never really stuck. And with Jackson leaving the NBA, that also was the end of one of the NBA's most iconic and successful offenses. So what really went wrong? The end of the Bulls dynasty is well known. Jerry Krause wanted to take the team in a different direction, and with aging superstars, saw the inevitability of the team collapsing. Kobe and Shaq, for the powerful duo that they were difficult to manage, and it's unreasonable to expect immediate success from the Lakers without Shaquille O'Neal. Not to mention, by that point in his career, age and weight were also starting to catch up to the Big Diesel, and for Phil Jackson, New York was New York. But that helps explain why Jackson's times with teams ended. It's safe to say that every dynasty, no matter how powerful, has an expiration date. But what about the triangle itself? To understand the fall of the triangle, let's go back to the basis of what the triangle offense is. After all, I have mentioned it quite a few times. The triangle offense is designed to create spacing, movement, and ball sharing amongst players on the court. The offense uses a series of cuts, screens, and passes to create scoring opportunities for players. It's called the triangle offense because the players on the court form a triangle shape, with one player in the corner, one on the wing, and one at the top of the key. The basic principles of the triangle offense involve players moving without the ball, reading the defense, and making quick passes to create open shots. The offense also emphasizes the importance of teamwork, as all 5 players on the court must be actively involved in the play. At least, that's how ChatGPT would describe the triangle. But the triangle would have a strong side where typically the guard, a forward, and a center form a triangle, with the off guard and other forward in the two-man position on the other side. And while the setup was simple, there were literally hundreds of possible actions that could be made. But the triangle thrived on taking advantage of a defense and outsmarting the other team. There were actions allowing for simple cuts, pin downs, other sorts of off-ball screens, down-low post actions, isolation, two-man game, and more. With the wide variety of plays that would occur and what often happened naturally, it was difficult for teams to stop as there was never just one player to focus on. Yes, guys like Kobe, Shaq, and Jordan were all dominant and filled up the box score, but it was the role players and the threat of scoring within the offense that gave the stars more room to operate. The notable aspect of the triangle is its spacing. Now, looking at footage of the triangle is wildly different from today's game of pace and space and motion offenses, but the triangle was incredible from a spacing standpoint for the time. Players under Jackson systems would often be spaced about 18 to 20 feet apart. This made it difficult for teams to double team a player without leaving someone else open, and I'll talk about it later, but the triangle also benefited as zone defenses weren't allowed into the NBA until the 2002 season, meaning if a team wanted to double team one of the greatest perimeter scorers of all time, or the most unstoppable player of all time, they would have to do so at the threat of having to fully commit and leave someone else open. But why did the triangle offense fail? Now, there are quite a few reasons as to why the triangle offense failed or aged out of the league. One of them is how complicated of a system it is. While I wouldn't say teams need everyone to be a jack of all trades kind of player, the triangle relied on players having fundamental skills, a high basketball IQ, team chemistry, good footwork, the ability to cut, play unselfishly, and pass at a high level. I know it's the NBA where everyone is talented, but you have to be good by NBA standards regardless of your position. This kind of required skill set has allowed players like Luke Longley and Dennis Rodman to thrive as they had skill sets that could mesh perfectly into this sort of offense. From a team construction standpoint, finding this many of these sorts of players is a lot easier said than done. Now, initially, I would have assumed zone defense being allowed within the NBA to slow down the triangle, but given that Jackson won quite a few finals afterwards, there's obviously a little more than that. Now, a good zone defense can help prevent against certain screens and cuts, but a team that uses good motion, off-ball screens, and high-low post actions can still counter a zone defense through the triangle. Now, when looking at some of the differences in era over the years, pace of play is one of the biggest ones to be brought up. It is no secret that the NBA saw some of the slowest paces of play in the 90s and 2000s, and the triangle wasn't exactly known for being a quick-hitting, 7 seconds or less offense. Oftentimes with the triangle, you're waiting on ball movement for a defender to make a mistake or to find an opening in the defense. While you may be able to get a quick attempt out of the post or maybe with the guard cutting into the corner, it wasn't reliable. The triangle thrived in a time where you could slow down and control the game, but when comparing just even the 2000s to the 2010s, there was a clear jump in pacing. Looking more about the modern NBA and the development of the game, the trend that we saw, especially towards the late 2000s and primarily the early 2010s, was spacing. Not just spacing from double teams, but spacing for the perimeter. Just look at how, for better or worse, how Chris Bosh's game changed once joining the Miami Heat. Now look at the triangle with a more modern spacing mindset, posing no more than 3 players beyond the arc with all of them standing on the same side of the court. Having this much of the court without a player spacing on it is criminal by modern NBA standards. Players like the power forward were started to be asked a lot more when it comes to spacing out the court. Just imagine a player like Dennis Rodman, a high IQ player who couldn't score outside of the paint. With zone defenses being allowed and a more modern analytical way of looking at teams' weaknesses, you can't leave Rodman on the perimeter and expect them to space. Could you imagine what that would look like today? But we'll talk about Draymond Green soon. But with an increase in speed to the game favoring against the triangle, with the termination of illegal defense, and with a new demand for perimeter spacing, it's not a big surprise that this very difficult to run offense started to come to an end. And it's also worth mentioning that unlike other great coaches, Jackson doesn't have a large coaching tree with his disciples showing the way up the triangle. Compared to someone like Popovich or Mike D'Antoni, it's not a surprise that the triangle disappeared with Jackson. But go check out my full video on the ultimate NBA coaching tree for more information on that. The triangle may be gone with the modern NBA, but that doesn't mean it can't be found in forms of modern NBA offenses. The team that we've seen this most used recently is the Golden State Warriors beyond the late 2010s. And it's not a surprise to see a team such as Golden State show principles of the triangles combined with the early 2000 Spurs motion offense. With head coach Steve Kerr playing for both Greg Popovich and Phil Jackson, it's not a surprise to see a team such as the Golden State Warriors have principles of the triangle offense compared with the early 2000 Spurs motion offense. The most direct evidence of this that we see includes the Warriors' post-up split motion, where one of the guards would enter the ball into the low post and then receive a screen from the forward in a similar way that the triangle would run. The other two players would spread out the floor in the same way as the triangle, but this time the forward would allow for additional spacing by playing more near the perimeter. And while this isn't the only instance that we've seen of the triangle, the Warriors have run it at an incredibly effective level. The Warriors have meshed elements of the triangle offense with Spurs-like motion and modern spacing. Add in the shooting abilities of guys like Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and even Jordan Poole, it's not a surprise that the Warriors can run sets that were undreamt of just 15 years ago. The other thing that the Warriors often shares with the triangle is its complexity. Golden State requires a lot of ball movement, cutting, and reacting to the defense, something that is difficult especially for newer players to grasp. And that's how we get to Draymond Green, who is more or less the Dennis Rodman of this offense. But most fans will tell you that his contributions go beyond the scoreboard. He's not just a smart player, but he has one of the greatest basketball IQs in history. And while Draymond was never known as a floor spacer except for one season, he was able to blend into the modern game through his use of ball handling, playmaking, cutting, and leadership. But just take a look at some of the role players the Warriors have had over the years. Guys like Andre Iguodala, Sean Livingston, David West, Kevon Looney, and even Andrew Wiggins have had their game elevated not just through the system, but through their IQ. In a league that has seen rapid development since its inception, it is telling that an offense that was first thought of in the 1940s still has a descendant today. While the sun has set on the triangle in the NBA, its success is undisputable, and it still has respect at lower levels of the game. While you may never run Phil Jackson's triangle, it is a part of the game that I think any baller should know how to run. And with the success of Steve Kerr in his offense, it won't surprise me if elements of the triangle continue to be seen in the NBA for decades to come.